So let's move on from beans. As fun as they are, we have to leave them at some point. Just to recognize that if we look at countries around the world, not countries around the world now, because we've exported American way of life. You could find Burger Hut and Pizza King and McCancer all over the place now. Didn't you laugh at that one? Yeah. Don't forget that laughing makes you live longer, you know. It's good for your health, makes you live longer, and the joke doesn't have to be funny. You just have to smile and laugh anyway. Even if the joke isn't funny, just smile and laugh, okay? If you don't get the joke, I'll raise my hand so you know it was a joke. If nobody laughs, I'll say, okay, just smile, laugh. But I went back to the I did this graph and worked on it in the 80s and the 90s based on data collected in the 1970s, because the published data in the 70s was from the government, from the World Health Organization, and governments putting together data from the 60s, which back then in the 60s, countries were eating very differently than they're eating today. They used to eat a lot of plants back then, before they had all these modern, before we had a lot of the food industry permeate small parts of the world. So now, if we look at the countries back then that were eating a lot of produce, natural produce, the question is, how much cancer did they have? How much heart attacks did they have, and how much strokes did they have in those countries? Well, let's take a look. The amount of heart attacks and strokes and cancers they had was completely inverse proportional to the amount of produce in the diet, right? Less produce, more cancer, more produce, less cancer and heart attacks. And we know that, remember the second principle of a nutritarian diet? What was that second principle? The first one was nutrient density. What was that second principle? Anybody know? Nobody? What? What? No. What? Hormonally favorable, that's right. And I gave an example of a diet being, of an insulin and high glycemic foods was how a diet would be not hormonally favorable, because too much sugar would push up insulin, which is a hormone that promotes cancer. The other hormone that promotes cancer, especially breast, prostate, and colon cancer, is IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. So excessive production of IGF-1 by the body is cancer promoting. It ages the brain. It takes away your lifespan, and it's dangerous. And the food that promotes IGF-1, oh, by the way, it's called insulin-like growth factor 1 because it's shaped like the insulin molecule, and it binds to the insulin receptor, and it does a lot what insulin does. But it's mostly a growth-promoting hormone, which is fine to promote growth if you're a cow in the first couple of years of life wanting to grow triple or quadruple its weight in the first week. Or it's fine to promote growth, even IGF-1, when you're in the mother's womb or a baby looking to grow, but when you're an adult no longer growing, the high levels of IGF-1 promote growth of tissues that shouldn't be growing, like tumors and cancers. Now let's look at this study, because these studies show that animal protein, high biological protein, promotes IGF-1. And this preoccupation we've had in America over the last 50 years, thinking that high biological protein was somewhat favorable to our longevity, was totally wrong. It's completely the opposite. The more high biological protein we eat, the more we shorten our lifespan. So let's look at a study here. Here's a study that followed people on a relatively low glycemic diet, and they followed over 6,000 people for 18 years. And they found that the people that about half these people had different levels of protein intake, but they all didn't eat a lot of junk food and weren't eating high glycemic carbohydrates. And they followed the amount of protein they were eating over this 18-year period. And in the 50 to 65 age group, all these people were between ages 50 and 65, followed for 18 years, they had a 4-fold increased risk of cancer. That's over a 300% increased risk of cancer in those followed for that 18-year period who were on what they called a high-protein diet, compared to those who were on a lower-protein diet. And over that 18-year period, those people in the 50 to 65 age range had a 75% increased risk of death over that period who ate a higher protein diet. Now here's the thing. How much protein were they eating in that high-protein group? And the answer is they were eating about 20% of calories from protein, which is about 30% of calories from animal product, because animal product's about a third fat. So that means they were eating in the high protein group about the same amount of animal products that Americans are already eating. Remember the pie graph I showed you at the beginning? It's about 34% of calories from animal products. So the high protein group was eating about the calories and the middle protein group was 15% of animal products or less, and the lower protein group was about 7.5% of animal products or less, about 5% of calories from animal protein or less, right? About 7.5% of calories from animal product, which is about less than a quarter of the amount of animal products Americans are presently eating. Now, why am I telling you these numbers? Are they that are very important? I'm telling you these numbers because some of the most popular diets out there you can remember, like the Atkins diet, the Dukan diet, the South Beach diet, the most paleo diets, are recommending people eat between 50 to 75% of calories from animal products. And here I'm showing you that when you go from 7.5% up to 30%, risk of death from cancer once goes up fourfold, 4 times. Are you following this? This is not the only study to show this. This is one of many studies that demonstrate the dangers of these high-protein diets. And I'm considering the American diet to be a high-protein diet. Did you follow that? Here's a study that looked at low-carb, high-protein diets, the ones advocated by a lot of these people who were so against high glycemic carbohydrates. Now, I'm against high glycemic carbohydrates too, but I don't substitute animal products in their place. I eat more greens and beans and nuts and mushrooms and, follow me? But they're putting in more animal products in place of those high glycemic carbohydrates. And here's a study that followed people for an average of 22 years. And they rated the person's diet based on how much they adhered to that low-carb, high-protein ideal. And the more they had a diet very high in animal products with very little high carbohydrate vegetable matter, very little glycemic load foods, they gave them a score of 20. If they had the other, completely the opposite, was mostly all vegetables or mostly all plant foods with very little animal products, they gave them a score of 1. So every person got a score of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, so on, up to 20. You could have been scored 16, 18, 17, 8, based on how closely your diet adhered to these two extremes. Are you following that? And what they found that is, as the people's diet better adhered to that higher protein, low carbohydrate concept, the risk of cardiovascular deaths, not just cancer, but heart attack deaths went up accordingly, so that those in the highest groups, the 16 to 20 range, had 60 times the increased risk of early cardiac death compared to those in the lower groups between 6 and below. Did you follow that now? Making it clear that this is one of many studies now to show, not to study these diets 1 or 2 years, but actually to study these diets 16, 20, 22 years to follow what's the long-term effects of these diets that are so popular in America, and the answer is they're killing people. They're dangerous. They're irresponsible. Now, why are people so overweight in America? Is it all because of what we're eating? How come almost everybody, even people who talk about health, are overweight? And their weight bounces around. Why is that? Because they're always hungry. There's no overweight animals in the jungles, in the woods. You don't see overweight squirrels running around. Actually, you do. I was in New York City at filming some kind of television thing, and I was in the park, and I noticed that the squirrels, these overweight squirrels, would come right up to you. They weren't even afraid of people. They'd sit right beside you waiting for you to feed them some kind of junk food. There's all these fast food restaurants and people give them chips and French fries. And these squirrels are just like they became human guinea pigs to show you how fattening fast food is, because you give it to the animals, they get obese too. They actually tested out. This is how a lot of these fast food companies manufacture their foods originally, by injecting salt and oil into the French fry batter, not just frying in the French fries, but putting sugar and salt in the burger meat to make people want to eat more. They tested out to see what would make people want to eat more calories and get addicted to those foods, and they use those techniques, and now they don't have to use the animals anymore to test those techniques out on, because they got you guys. All right, so the 4 dimensions of hunger. Why can't you stop eating? Why are people eating more food? Why do they eat till they get overweight? Why do they make them keep eating? Well, that's the person's helping me out here. They said lack of nutrients in the food. That's the point. That's one of the important points I'm making. I'm saying that when you don't meet the body's need for nutrients, we get perverted and uncontrolled cravings and addictions and drive to overeat food. That makes almost all Americans overweight. I just said makes almost all Americans overweight. How many Americans are overweight? What % of Americans are overweight? Anybody know? Almost all of you said between 65 and 70%. One person said 80%. I just want to make this clear that conventional health authorities say that about 66% of Americans are overweight or obese because they consider a BMI above 25 to be overweight or obese. But I don't consider a BMI above 25 to be overweight. I consider a BMI above 23 to be overweight. So my criteria for overweight is because a BMI of 24 or 25 is still overweight. Most all long-lived societies around the world where you live much longer than Americans lived all have a BMI below have 23 or below. So if you use 23 as the cutoff point, then you have 85% of Americans are being overweight, not 66%. Did you follow that reasoning? Also, what about the Americans that are of normal weight? Well, when you're an alcoholic or when you're a drug addict, it keeps you at normal weight. When you smoke cigarettes, it keeps you at normal weight. When you have occult cancers or you're sickly, you have digestive disorders, autoimmune disease, depression, or it keeps you at a more normal weight. In other words, the majority of people in America that have a normal weight have some medical condition keeping them at a normal rate. In other words, if you're healthy and there's nothing wrong with you, then you're supposed to be overweight if you're eating American food. There's something biologically wrong if you're eating American food and you're not overweight. American food's the problem, not you. A healthy person should become overweight if you eat like other Americans eat. We have to change the way Americans eat, though. They're committing suicide with their knife and fork. And their diet is low in food volume because they're eating concentrated calories that don't have the volume, because the stomach needs volume to curtail its overeating. It needs something that takes up space, like vegetation. And it needs nutrients. If you don't meet your nutrient needs, you get cravings to overeat. You want to put in more calories than you need. You do need some calories. But one of the most critical and most important factors that lead people to becoming overweight is food addiction, which we started to talk about, which let's talk about some more right now, okay? Remember I told you when foods are fast food, when those calories are absorbed very rapidly, they set off dopamine receptors in the brain and make you want to be thinking about eating those foods all the time, because they're like taking narcotics or snorting cocaine. Eating a bagel, eating a piece of cheesecake or ice cream is the same as snorting cocaine. Sets off dopamine receptors, and you just want to keep doing it. Keep craving those things. The pleasure only lasts for a few seconds, but the dopamine receptors keeps you thinking about it all the time. Your car will automatically drive right into Dunkin' Donuts. Oops, I should have said that. Without even thinking about that. That donut place, right. It's like they should make those things illegal, and then we could have an underground, illegal, kind of people selling donuts, sneaking in donuts across the border of Mexico. Gun wars of people who are having donuts, right, and shooting themselves up, and people buying donuts for high prices. That's the way it should be. Like, you have to pay like $50 or $100 a donut from this guy on the street corner selling it to you you're hiding out behind his car. But if you're eating more high-volume foods, obviously, the green vegetables, all raw vegetables have high volume, and raw vegetables, of course, all their calories are not biologically accessible when they're raw. There's less calories in a raw carrot than the same carrot cooked. Did you follow that? When they're raw, the calories go up, part of them go through. You don't get digested as well. And cooked green vegetables, greens, whether they're cooked or raw, are low-calorie foods. Cooked asparagus, broccoli, zucchini, snow pea pods, right? Artichokes. High in nutrients, very low in calories. Eat them as much as you want. Stuff yourself. Go full hog on those. They're only less than 70, they're about 75 calories a pound. You're not going to gain weight eating artichokes. And fresh fruits are low caloric, and non-green vegetables that are low carbohydrate, non-green vegetables, eggplant, mushrooms, tomatoes, onions, peppers, eggplant, they're all very, very low in calories. And if you're overweight, looking to lose weight and have diabetes, we want to eat more of high-volume foods that are low in calories to make you feel full, to not occupy those stretch receptors. Because obviously, if you lived in the woods or the jungles with the gorillas and ate what they ate, which was mostly green vegetables, the gorillas eat mostly green vegetables, at less than 75 calories a pound, how many pounds are you going to eat to feel satisfied? Maybe you're swinging on the vines you're swinging on the vines and climbing those trees with the gorillas. Maybe you're burning 3,000 calories a day. I don't know, but at 75 calories a pound, you'd have to eat like 35, 40 pounds of food a day to get enough calories, wouldn't you? I tried that once as an experiment, thinking if I could eat 25 pounds of food in a day like the gorillas do and see if I could get enough calories to sustain myself with green vegetables. And my jaw and my mouth got so sore, I couldn't chew anymore. I couldn't even handle the chewing. Your stomach couldn't fit it in. There's no way you could consume all that food. No way you could do it. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this to let you know how easy it is to lose weight. It's impossible to consume a lot of calories if you're eating a lot of high-nutrient natural foods. Matter of fact, like the experiment with the gorilla, you become too thin. You wouldn't maintain enough weight, enough muscle. A human couldn't sustain themselves because they'd be too low in calories. You'd be too thin. And you wouldn't want to eat anymore because you'd be so full, but you'd be too thin. You couldn't get enough calories in. Just show you how easy it is for people to become thin. That's the point. But volume isn't everything. We're going to talk more about these other things in a few minutes. But just to continue volume, you can only gain weight if you use concentrated calories, mostly animal products, oils, processed carbohydrates, to fit enough calories in the stomach, because the stomach only holds a liter of food, and you can't put more than 400 or 500 calories at a time into the stomach if you're eating natural foods. It fills it up too easily. It's impossible to become overweight because you can't get enough calories into the human body if you're eating natural foods. You have to become overweight like all Americans did. They've had to eat in foods whose calories have been artificially concentrated. Did you follow that? Now, to avoid overeating on high-calorie food, it's called crowding out. The way it makes it easier for people to lose weight is to eat enough high-nutrient, low-calorie food, because then you want less of the high-caloric stuff that you've become addicted to. So you have this person who's a food addict, and the first step to get rid of their food addictions is to have them have to eat a lot of high-volume, low-calorie food. High-nutrient food, too. It's the first step, right? Because the fibrous bulk prevents overeating, the nutrients trigger to the brain, stops the cravings, and it starts to begin to undo some of the problems. Now, there are two types of food addiction. There's the one we talked about already, which is dopamine stimulation of the brain from eating that caloric surge into the bloodstream. Remember that? Like cocaine, of eating those high, like oils and sugars, and that's the. And then there's the second part, which we're going to talk about now, which is called detoxification or withdrawal, which means that you feel like crap when you detox from that addictive substance. Like, for example, if you're drinking 10 cups of coffee a day and you stop drinking coffee, do you feel better or worse when you stop? Worse. Because you're going to get headachy and shaky and weak and fatigued from the detoxification from the caffeine. If you're snorting cocaine or smoking cigarettes and you stop, do you feel better when you stop cigarettes? Eventually you feel better, but in the short term, you feel worse, a lot worse, right? Itchy and irritable and anxiety. You can't tolerate it. But here's what I'm saying to you. I'm saying that the feeling worse, the detox, that's right directed. That's the body's efforts to remove the noxious substance from the tissues, to circulate them, to use the kidney and liver and the bloodstream to get them out of the body. That feeling worse means you're getting better. Feeling better means you're getting worse. In other words, I could make you feel better by giving you another cup of coffee or giving you a little more cocaine or another smoke of cigarettes. You'll feel better, but feeling better isn't getting better. Feeling better is getting worse. Anything that makes you feel better is bad for you. Well, almost anything that makes you feel better is bad for you. Like, for example, I can give you a product from the health food store, maybe an herbal remedy, and I could make your heart go faster, or your heart go slower, or I'd make you urinate more or urinate less, or wake you up or put you to sleep. In other words, I can give you pharmacologic substances, but their pharmacologic efficacy is proportional to their toxicity. It's the toxic part of the natural substance that's having these biological effects. Because it's natural doesn't make it less toxic. A lot of the drugs doctors use came from natural herbs that were now isolated and refined. The point is, we want to live in a manner to avoid the need for medicinal substances, whether natural or otherwise. want to not have the need for medicinal substances. Plants give us nutritive substances, but those plants that are highly toxic or have medicinal properties and have drug effects and can have drug effects, but it has a pharmacologic effect or a drug-like effect. We learned in medical school that they work by blocking or interfering or poisoning some natural body action. In other words, they're toxic. Anything with a pharmacologic effect is toxic or poisonous. Now, I'm telling you this because we build up cell-retained toxins, like free radicals, like advanced glycation end products. And I do want you to remember that term AGE, or advanced glycation end products, because it's one of the major toxins that build up in people that have a high glycemic diet. Advanced glycemic end product means that the glucose moieties get attached to proteins and it ages us. That's where the diabetic becomes blind, or they develop nerve damage in their legs, or they get kidney failure, the buildup of AGEs, and these AGEs build up in all of us who are non-diabetic too and age us prematurely. So the point is that the body is a miraculous, self-healing, self-repairing machine that looks to remove those noxious products from the body if we don't overburden it with stresses, if we let it.